UNESCO IITE, and Inquirer.net in the Philippines. This series of webinars grew out of our learning during the COVID-19 pandemic and the requirement that we felt needed to be explored about what the future of education might look like in Asia. I'd like to introduce you, first of all, to Imi Alcantara from Inquirer.net, who've been so supportive of this piece of work. Imi, over to you.
Hello, and good afternoon to those in Asia. Good morning to those in the UK. Welcome to the webinar. This is actually a first of a series of webinars that we will be conducting in partnership with Nisai, UNESCO, and of course, Inquirer Interactive as the media partner. We're very excited to hear from our speakers this afternoon who will be sharing their perspectives and thoughts about how we can create a truly inclusive educational system in Asia. So over to you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Imi. So in terms of what we're trying to do today, we need to look at what reform might look like to ensure that the right of education is expanded across all the ages, all the population, so that there's meaningful education opportunities for everybody, supporting the UN SDG 2030 goals. We're trying to create inclusive systems, and this asks great questions of government policymakers about policy frameworks, and also about how we restructure and reframe education. There is an issue here, not just of, is it fair, in terms of people having access to education no matter what they need, but also about the economics of it, about human potential and the way that we can better support social integration and economic integration so that all the population can contribute the most they possibly can to the economy and to the future development of the nation. So where we're starting from today is we have three fantastic speakers, each of which brings a different kind of perspective. We look at what we've learned about how technology might need to be developed and changed to be more inclusive. We're going to look at how the overall systems need to be changed. And we'll also look at how teaching will need to be changed. So where we're going to start, and we're very, very privileged to have Natalia here, is with Natalia Amelina. And Natalia is the Senior Project Officer in Education and the Chief of Unit for Teacher Professional Development and Networking at UNESCO. Natalia has been a friend of Nisai Group for a very long time, very supportive of the work that we do. And she's really been involved in development of ICT for vulnerable groups of students of whatever age, and also in skills development and competency development for teachers. Not only thinking about what the children will need and what adults will need, but actually what the teachers will need to be able to get them there. Natalia's got over 20 years experience in this field, was one of the chief, if you like, researchers and learners during the pandemic in this area, and author of over 30 different papers in the field of education. So Natalia, if you're okay, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I just need to say that UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies in Education is very glad to support this initiative, this series of webinars, since inclusive education is one of the flagship activities of UNESCO in general. Could I ask colleagues to share my slides? Yes, thank you so much. Let me start my presentation with a brief information about our institute. UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies and Education is working in Moscow, and this is a global institute working with all UNESCO member states in the field of integration of information and communication technologies in different levels and forms of education. Next slide, please. I will start today's presentation with the Sustainable Development Goals. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in September 2015, calls for a new vision to address the environmental, social, and economic concerns facing the world today. The agenda includes 17 Sustainable Development Goals, including SDG 4 on education. UNESCO recognizes that achieving the 2030 Agenda requires the cultivation of transformative, innovative, and creative thinking and skills, and complement and empowered citizens. For education to achieve its potential, urgent changes are needed. That includes steps to eliminate persistent disparities in education access and achievement, to improve educational quality, and to provide learners with knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors to ensure inclusive and sustainable societies. Technology plays a vital role in the transformation and in achieving of Agenda 2030. Advances in technological development have already brought improvements in many aspects of life, such as health, agriculture, infrastructure, and renewable energy. ICT-based learning is also a key for preparing students for the world of work, enabling entry into careers of tomorrow. Next slide, please. Technologies are the driving force of education. Countries across the world have been leveraging ICT to advance education for many, many years. These initiatives are driven by public institutions and involve commercial technology companies and have resulted in paradoxes such as increasing digital inequalities and even access to high-quality digital learning opportunities. However, skills learned at schools are often misaligned with the skills needed to find decent jobs or engage positively in the development of the country. Next slide, please. The Director General of UNESCO, Ms. Adere Azoulay, said that during the COVID pandemic, distance learning tools via the internet, but also via radio and television, showed just how useful and necessary they could be. However, they also revealed their limits. Indeed, this period highlighted a deep-rooted tendency to technological solutions as a universal tool suitable for all situations and form of progress. But this is a confusion between the tool and the solution, between the means and the end. There are three paradoxes, three popular misconceptions. Firstly, there is the promise of personalized learning. Very often, this powerful hope leads us to forget the fundamental social and human dimension that lies at the heart of the education. It is worse that no screen can ever replace the humanity of a teacher. While technology promises easier access to education, the reality is that digital divides still exist, to the point of actually increasing educational inequalities. During the pandemic, almost a third of pupils didn't have effective access to distance learning, since only 40% of primary schools worldwide currently have internet access. The last paradox, and by no means the least, is that despite the desire to make education a global common good, the role of commercial and private interests in education continues to grow. With all the ambitions that entail, to date, only 1 in 7 countries legally guarantees the privacy of educational data. Next slide, please. Let's have a look what kind of inequalities exist in education and how ICT in education is implementing at a global level. Many countries around the world employ technology-based solutions to support inclusion. At the same time, we need to bear in mind that many students lacked the necessary equipment, internet access, accessible materials, adapted content, and human support that would have allowed them to follow online programs. 40% of poorer countries did not provide specific support to disadvantaged learning during the COVID-19 crisis. And finally, inclusion and distance education in many countries increased social inequalities. Next slide, please. The digital divide in learners' access to equipment, electricity, and internet, as well as teacher quality, is deepening the learning divide in every country, especially for learners with disabilities, who often face the additional barrier in inaccessible learning content. More than 1/3 of all school children globally were unable to practice remote learning during the COVID-19. Although increasing access to technology could bridge the learning divide by offering students access to remote education, students with disabilities may not have the same access to tools, the same support, or the same skills to find their bearings in virtual environments. If digital technology is to be a tool for educational equality, distance learning programs must train teachers in different learning methods tailored to their students' needs. Again, this is not to say that all learning must occur online, but if it is online, it must be a tool for educational equality. Next slide, please. Based on the research implemented by our institute, UNESCO IITE, jointly with the Beijing Normal University, we can summarize that there is a necessary paradigm shift in education from issues of accessing and sharing information to designing active and collaborative learning environments where participants are actively engaged in deep and meaningful learning. Student-oriented learning moves students from passive receivers of information to active participants in their own discovery process. What students learn, how they learn it, and how their learning is assessed are all driven by each individual student's needs and abilities. Learning differences should be valued among students, and a student-centered and data-driven approach should be applied to identify learning differences for all students. Student-centered pedagogy has many benefits. For example, personalization improves students' attitudes toward learning. Service and project-based learning increases students' engagement, and teaching students how to self-regulate improves academic performance. The development of student-centered pedagogy is very essential, as the availability of technology may expand the potential of student-centered learning. So technology is slowly but surely changing the teaching profession. In those education systems where technology is widely available, teachers need to adapt their pedagogy, use multiple resources related to the curriculum and assessment, and interact more frequently with students and parents. Next slide, please. Now I'm very happy to share with you some results and achievements of our work. Our institute is trying to work both at political level with formulating recommendations, guidelines for policymakers, as well as at the level of practitioners, for teachers. Let me show with you some examples of our activities, results of activities. First of all, I would like to inform you about the massive online open course, which is titled Introduction to Web Accessibility. This course was developed jointly with the World Wide Web Consortium several years ago already, but it's still, I would say, a kind of hot topic. Currently, we have about 27,000 enrollments from over 155 countries. This course, this MOOC, is uploaded on edX platform. It's absolutely free. You can find these materials very easily. Next slide, please. During the COVID and a little bit after the COVID crisis, our institute, jointly with UNESCO Institute for Educational Planning, developed a series of materials for to support teachers on ICT in inclusive education. The first one is a policy brief. It's more will be more interesting for persons taking decisions in the policy. This is understanding the impact of COVID-19 on the education of persons with disabilities, after that, we have developed also an analytical report, a rapid assessment of the inclusive open and distance learning solutions for students with disabilities. And our focus was on Rwanda and Mauritius, which are in the priority area in African region. And of course, it will be interesting for teachers to look at series of publications from Colombia, Bangladesh, and Mauritius. There are some practical experience like case studies collection that will definitely provide interesting information for our specialists. Next slide, please. I also would like to share with you interesting information about our current project with Chengdu. This is Chinese fund, private fund. During this project, which was started 3 years ago, I think already 4 years ago, we have first of all developed a needs assessment in our target countries, and again we focused on Rwanda and Mauritius as the targeting areas in African region. Based on the results of the needs assessment on ICT in inclusive education, we have developed action plans and some guidelines for teachers how to integrate technologies into educational process. Recently, we have developed 2 online courses, training courses, 36 hours each course. We have invited specialists from several countries, including Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Mauritius, Rwanda, and Sierra Leone. You can see on the slide the enrollments, what is important for us that based on the developed action plans and recommendations, we had a chance to have some open dialogue with the specialists from these countries and to hear their needs, to support them more in their situation after the post-COVID situations. Next slide, please. Based on the results and research activities implemented by our institute, we have summarized some conclusions related to integration of information and communication technologies in inclusive education. And first of all, I would like to share with you our understanding of barriers to e-inclusion. They are lack of knowledge about assistive technologies, lack of internet connection or digital devices, lack of digital skills and ICT competencies, both of teachers and students, lack of time for professional development, a lack of knowledge about educational innovations, lack of time to interact with colleagues and to exchange experience between the teachers, and lack of support from the management for the use of open and distance learning solutions. Next slide, please. We also summarized the outcomes and future impact. It is important to understand that integration of modern technologies to inclusive education will face the following barriers at the level of administration and organization. First of all, this is a lack of financial and technical resources. Secondly, we speak about insufficient leadership and management strategies, a lack of infrastructure and assistive technologies, a lack of networking and exchange of good practices, a gap between rural and urban areas, insufficient training opportunities for teachers, and finally, a lack of support to learning process from home. Next slide, please. Recognizing and duly addressing various barriers, challenges, and understandings will greatly contribute to timely and efficient mitigation of the pandemic's impact on equitable quality education. While many publications currently advocate for disability-inclusive pandemic responses, few papers studies specifically measure the impact of COVID-19 on students with disabilities, and often fewer propose explicit strategies to provide education that meets the needs of all learners. For further recovery actions to truly benefit persons with disabilities, today's specialized publications must recognize and highlight the issue of integral gap, social exclusion, and digital divide among people with disabilities, as they are not given the provision that they need before, during and possibly after the pandemic. The pandemic has highlighted the needs for online learning, presenting an opportunity to create a flexible, equitable, and inclusive system of learning. While the global disruption in education will have considerable long-term negative effects, educational stakeholders need to work with persons with disabilities to ensure that digital education solutions are not just assistive technologies, but truly universally inclusive technologies. Next slide, please. Let me share with you our vision of the next steps forward for e-inclusion in education. For sure, we need to provide system-wide approach and reform and global partnership, which includes new competencies among educators on accessible digital environment, which includes strengthened cooperation and networking, raised awareness and academic society on digital inclusion, inclusive and equitable quality digital resources, and finally, safe and innovative use of technology. Next slide, please. In order to support teachers who are working in inclusive education and to share examples of good practices, to share online training courses, UNESCO IITE has developed e-library for teachers. This is our joint project with Chinese company NetDragon. It was launched last year. And have the following objectives. First of all, to boost teacher ICT competency development, to provide educators with advanced digital resources and AI-based educational solutions, to strengthen teaching networks and to contribute to capacity buildings in target regions. Currently, we have 4 languages of this platform. They are English, Arabic, Russian, and Chinese languages. And you may visit this platform and find a number of good quality resources, not only from UNESCO, but also from UNESCO partners, including Commonwealth of Learning, IST, which is International Society for Technologies in Education, and many, many others. They are open and free resources, and currently we are working also on some networking activities for teachers. We plan to launch several forums on specific topics and somehow to support teachers to exchange their practices and exchange ideas regarding integration of ICTs to an education. Next slide, please. I think that was the final slide. Thank you very much. It was very important for our institute to be involved in this project, and I'm ready to answer your questions after all presentations. Thank you so much. Paul, back to you.
Hi, Natalia. Can you hear me? Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for that. I think I have a slight tech issue, so I am going to have to hand over straight away to Brajesh, who will be talking about the view from the ADB.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. Just to make a slight correction, I retired from ADB so a few months back. But my presentation reflects what we're trying to achieve when I was there. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. It is a pleasure to join this discussion today, and I'd like to thank Nisai for this invitation. My presentation will start with a quick reflection on the global learning crisis and focus on a holistic and integrated model that is critical to address the learning crisis and move beyond. I will also emphasize the capacity constraint, which is so important to unlock multi-layered problems. And I'm glad I'm coming after Natalia, because she highlighted some of the critical aspects of inclusion. Next slide, please. So the biggest challenge that most developing countries are facing today is that the majority of students are not learning despite attending schools. There's so much written about it. This clearly means improving physical access alone does not guarantee learning. An even greater challenge is that those who are learning are disproportionately those that were already doing well. As we all know, global analyses indicate that the learning crisis has worsened during COVID-19 from around 53% of children not learning by the end of grade 3 to nearly 70%, affecting disproportionately the most vulnerable. Lots of good analysis on the crisis is available, but not enough on what is required and what works. I think countries are looking for that, and also positive spin of this whole learning exercise. but analysis on what works is available. It is not clear if it can be scaled up. There is also growing consensus that the binding constraints relate to lack of scalable pedagogical and governance models. Solutions tend to be partial, but successful countries have taken holistic and integrated approaches and pursued them by tweaking and improving persistently. So the debate is also around whether to just focus on foundational learning or also go beyond that to look at 21st century skills. So that debate, I think, is an important one, but then it need not be separate. And I'll come to that a little bit later. Next slide, please. So I'll focus most of my time on this slide. One consensus that is emerging from the learning crisis is that patchy approaches will not work and may even be confusing, given that there are so many moving parts in an education system. Here, there is a growing emphasis on evidence-based policymaking and implementation. This means it is critical to take a holistic approach to addressing this crisis. Again, there are many very useful lessons emerging from the COVID-19 lockdown that has upended education. Let me highlight some of the critical elements of such a holistic framework with examples where feasible. First, the focus must be on learning rather than access. In other words, access needs to be redefined as access to learning. But this requires ability, willingness, and a reliable system to measure whether students are learning or not. Many developing countries still lack this. Those that have been successful develop such a system. For example, Korea's focus initially on identifying student learning on lagging students and ensuring improving their learning by supporting schools was exemplary. Second, reducing disparity among learners is more important to ensuring overall learning of all students than focusing on those that are already learning due to various support they received at home and in schools. In one of the reports by OECD, which analyzed some of the myths in education, notes that the 10% most disadvantaged 15-year-olds in Shanghai have better math skills than the 10% most privileged students in the United States and several European countries. If a system is focused on learning of everyone, it is possible to develop a system that works for everyone rather than reinforcing myths like it's very difficult to teach disadvantaged kids. Other successful countries also emphasize learning for everyone and provide different types of support. Such support could range from conditional cash transfers to support households to remedial classes to target lagging students to school meals, health, and hygiene-related support. Third, COVID-19 school lockdown showed that students that are lagging behind were disproportionately affected due to lack of connectivity and lack of adequate support available at home, which Natalia cogently highlighted. Knowing that learning happens not only in school, but also outside of school and particularly at home for young children, it is crucial to expand support to such households through programs like conditional cash transfers and others such as connectivity, nutrition, and health support, particularly well-being of young children. Fourth, it is repeatedly proven that teacher quality is the single most important element to ensure quality. All successful countries have done it by attracting, retaining, and incentivizing more qualified graduates from universities. For example, a major factor in Estonia's rapid rise on PISA performance has to do with how it has emulated Finland's approach to attracting such teachers. For a relatively quicker impact, partnering with universities to engage fresh graduates with subject knowledge in science, mathematics, and language, along with the likes of Teach for All organizations to contract teachers for 2-3 years, can boost the quality of teachers. This has to be complemented by preparing and deploying school principals creatively to improve the efficacy of schools, as they will be better able to simplify currently loaded curriculum introduce EdTech such as adaptive learning, complemented by open source materials from the likes of Khan Academy, and aligned with national curriculum to track and support all students at scale. Finally, education needs to be integrated with other sectors as it is a means to prepare experts, leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs that contribute to peace, harmony, and socio-economic development of a country. This is why combining whole of government and life cycle approaches is critical to anticipate and prepare self-directed 21st century lifelong learners to address emerging challenges and opportunities like climate change, digital transformation, and global peace and coexistence. One effective implementation model would be to decentralize at the municipality and local government level through competitive grants, while the central ministries provide leadership in overall vision, guidance, standards, and regulation, as demonstrated by Shanghai, China, Singapore, city of Turku in Finland, and New Delhi in India. Municipalities can be instrumental in transforming school education with a focus on foundational learning. So to go back to my initial point on whether or not to integrate 21st century skills, it's very important to do that, but that may have to be done in harmony with categorization of schools and targeting lagging students to support and then also reinforce through other means. So that is very important. Next slide, please. At the end, let me conclude with some key messages as shown on this slide. This slide highlights the key factors that I outlined in my earlier presentation for the short, medium, and long term. For example, benchmarking and ensuring standards with flexibility are critical to lay the foundation. Similarly, standardizing some of the key steps where learning is very poor and relaxing as learning improves is equally critical. Without EdTech, it will not be possible to scale learning and equity. Thankfully, it is now possible due to the development of AI and big data analytics. Hence, the importance of teachers and principals in partnership with other organizations becomes even more important. Finally, I want to re-emphasize the importance of partnerships with the likes of Nisai, which have developed insights on addressing equity. So that's the end of my presentation. Back to you, Paul. I think you are muted, Paul.
Can you hear me now? There we go. That was astonishingly concise analysis of the current position. And it also reflects some of the rapid research that was done midterm in COVID about those three key aspects that researchers looking at about access, well-being being so critical, but that this has been reinforced over time and reinforced by the pandemic. So what we're just seeing is a piece where that disadvantage is being multiplied. That was fantastically put together. The third bit, though, I think that you really did hit really powerfully there, was the importance of great teaching, and how that will always be at the base of what will really make a difference for us and for those young people. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Really impactful. A lot for me to think about. I think a lot for everybody to think about in there, and also to take that point that we're 2 years now out of the first stage of the pandemic, and you're already planning 10 years ahead. I think there's something for us all to be thinking about in that, and we'll be covering this in the next 2 webinars. Now, I just want to hand over to Dr. Jim Pugh. Thank you, Prajesh. And sort of on cue, Jim is going to look at teaching and what that might be, where we might be about teaching as we move forward post-COVID, and in terms of a reform in the system in Asia. Thank you, Jim.
Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon. Let me pop our slides up. Does that work, Paul? Can you see that?
I can't see your slides yet, Jim.
Oh, hold on a second. I'm not a native Zoom user, so
There you go.
How's that?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Dr. Jim Pugh. I'm the Director of the Institute of Education here at Staffordshire University, and I'm an Associate Professor of Education. As Paul just said, I'm going to concentrate a little bit more on the workforce of those that are going to work in our education systems into the future, certainly globally and in Asia. And I think some of the themes of the previous speakers resonate all throughout what I'm going to say. My research at the university, alongside with colleagues here, is somewhat varied, but has a very a strong trend of access to education and that of high quality, and that's been done with regional and projects, most recently in early years, and also knows children and young people and their aspirations of what they want to be and what they want to do after their education. And myself and colleagues at Staffordshire University, we follow that up. So not just in the research, but also in practicalities, for example, in supporting local governments and school boards, things like young people's skills strategy, and then also working as directors on school trusts as well. And I've been fortunate enough to have experiences of working internationally across Africa, Asia and East Asia, and currently work alongside two partners in China, where some of that is direct in education and teacher training, and similarly in developing some work with Vietnamese partners too in teacher education. I've been a follower of the great work in Nisai for a long time now, and have the pleasure of working with colleagues on projects in the Nisai Education Trust charity group, which has done some really good work for children and education globally. And finally, a long-time advocate of technology and education, from championing the practice in schools and higher education. Like many of the speakers beforehand, my talk is obviously based upon professional work, but some of these thoughts and views are of my personal perceptions rather than the formal presentation of the university stance. And to give you an example, and this relates to what other speakers have already said, we're kicking off our new academic year, and it's a strange start in the UK. We're technically in autumn, yet we've just come out of a week-long heat wave after a dreadful summer, so the hottest September since records began, and we're kind of seeing this similar turbulence and an ongoing strangeness in our politics in the UK, where to me we seem to be a bit resigned to an upcoming general election and an anticipated change, and this won't be within the UK, and I'm afraid to say this can lead to a stagnation and hampering of innovation. And as you've heard from colleagues earlier, the stakes, which ultimately are about the lives of children, the success across the globe, are so high that it's discourses like this, it's organisations like we've had that have put on today's discussion, which is so important, because it puts these pressures on our systems and policy makers for sustained progress. So again, I certainly thank and echo the thanks of my previous speakers for inviting me to talk. So for me, a very simple kind of presentation and a kind of a narrative the way through it. It concentrates certainly on that wider conversation regarding inclusive and high quality education system, but more so about how we're going to engage a professional and reflective educational workforce. And following that simple structure, I think we need to just outline of why do we need this professional educational workforce, not just people that stand up in front of children or adults, but what we mean by professional. Why we think this is a challenge and something that it can't be taken for granted. And finally, some practices of Staffordshire University, which I've been able to have some influence on in my leadership role here, which will kind of track back to why I think it's so important. And throughout my presentation, you'll see I've used some diagrams and screenshots, and rather than include lots of quotes, which sometimes busy the slides, each of the diagrams has an embedded hyperlink. So if anybody wants these slides, and I'm sure the organisers can make them available to you, you'll find that you'll get to the original sources pretty quickly. So why do we need a professional education workforce? And what do we mean by a professional education workforce? And I think our largest body of what I'm talking about, so I'm not trying to always use the term teacher, because it encompasses more than that, but the biggest group of those is going to be teachers, and those by professional teacher, I would say it's those who are leading and managing learning within their classroom. Now, whether that's a face-to-face or whether that's virtual. It's also about educators as well, from our preschool to higher education. And in fact, I think the preschooling sector is one which policymakers have got to engage with more. And evidence is showing that the foundation stages for children are critically important. And whilst I'm going to outline this growing and shared acknowledgement of a teacher recruitment crisis, I feel that this is mirrored with the high quality and trained early years and preschool professionals too. And the reason for my research informed quote here, which has come from the Education Endowment Foundation, is whether we're policymakers or whether we're head teachers or part of this educational workforce, the quality of those that are working with our learners, the quality of the people that are delivering learning to children is the most vital importance for learner outcomes and their attainment. And therefore, the concept of attracting and selecting and training this high quality workforce is essential to the future of all education systems. And what I often perceive is an oversight into the complexity of this journey of attracting, selecting and training educational professionals. Furthermore, the continual mentoring and development and retention of this high quality workforce. And at this time, from a UK perspective, I'm afraid to say that I think we're losing on both counts. We're not recruiting as many teachers and we're not keeping them. Asia and the global community must recognise our difficulties as they move forward, and I know that they already are. You'll see in the top left-hand corner the use of the African proverb, if it takes a village to raise a child. Well, my question is, if it takes a village to raise a child, then what on earth does it take to raise a teacher, an early years professional, a vocational expert? And my answer is that we need a structured and strategic approach to their training and ongoing support for a range of colleagues, everybody that will work with them. And that's not just a parachuted in support, that's got to be over a sustained and period of time, if not throughout their career. And my questions to all sectors, whether it's early years, primary, secondary, post-compulsory, is that in a point in time when we're facing a seeing rise of the fourth industrial revolution and the mainstream influence of artificial intelligence, is if what makes a great teacher or educator today, will it be the same recipe or the same approach as ensuring what makes a great teacher tomorrow? And we're seeing that the pace of change in technology and also in society, and some of which has been a COVID catalyst, is at times frightening. And I say frightening from a professional stance and also a stance of a parent of two teenagers. The pace of change in what is in front of us and in their schooling and what the technology is showing us is that I would argue it's accelerating at a faster pace than ever of what we're seeing in front of us. So why is all this a challenge? And over the next few minutes, I'll try not to totally depress the online audience, but I've pointed out definitely some of the challenges that we're facing in these areas, and then hopefully as we move forward, the final few minutes, I'll try to do some what I think the work that we're already doing to address it. The UNESCO quote is clear indication of my overall point for the slide, that we're facing this teacher, educator and recruitment crisis on a global scale. And the conditions, and that which is sometimes pay, sometimes recognition, and the expectations of what teachers are expected to endure are bluntly not in line with the professional educational workforce that they will put up with. So we see them either not joining or leaving very quickly. And as evidence, the research of Institute of Fiscal Studies in 2022, so just last year, shows that between 2007 and 2019, the number of children in English state primary schools rose by 16%. But over the same period, the number of primary school teachers only increased by 13%. And we've got a similar trajectory in secondary education in the UK too. So bluntly, we've got more children in the system and less teachers. On the bottom right-hand side of the screen, just to add to our woes, you'll see that a CNN news article, and I could have used any news, I could have used the same story, but from other sources. This was just one that seemed to come up well on the screen. And the article outlines the troubles in South Korea at the moment. This has only been going on over the past couple of weeks, which is portraying the suicide of a teacher as a result of the parental pressures on children's progress in a culture which holds education excellence so high. And similarly, we've seen a tragedy in the UK with the suicide of head teacher Ruth Perry after her school was downgraded by the English regulatory system after inspection. So in short, we've got two examples from two different global regions, which are showing the impact and expectations, which I'd suggest are a hugely detrimental impact of recruitment and retention of our workforce. So here are some of the examples of the challenge, and probably where I think we probably need to, or policymakers need to pay some attention here, of what could help us on this journey throughout. And as I point these out, you see I've put my create win-win partnerships and collaborations, and I think that's certainly key as we moving forward. And you know, my diagram there of the boat sinking, in this case would certainly be in the UK, would be at the bottom of this boat, not enough teachers, and whoever's at the top of it, where they think they're sustaining at the moment, it's not going to be isolated. So firstly, education is not a zero-sum game. And this methodology of a zero-sum game is used so often, and we're all part of it, and I have to hold my hands up too. And what I mean by this, on the left-hand side, we can see the PISA scores, and I would urge us to view the perceived success and emphasize on the perceived, because it's one lens of those countries in that top rankings, to be seen as something where we can all learn and share from at that point in time. And this success should be seen as a place to raise practice and outcomes globally. But what tends to happen in any table is for one to improve, another must fail. And I think that's the wrong side of the lens that we look at. And on the right-hand side, and this comes from my own sector, where you'll see in higher education the extensive use of league tables. And those are 3 league tables from 2022, 2023 league ranking tables. They're all from the what would be seen as the most orthodox or most popular international league ranking tables, and each of them have the same universities in the top of their league ranks, and they're all in a different order. And what I would say is rather than one have to win and another have to lose, it's about how is it that we can build from this as leaders and influencers within education constructively, rather than taking this zero-sum game methodology to create silos. My other example here is the huge transformation in workplaces, and this goes back to that workforce. So we've seen a massive changing approaches to working globally, especially in the form of technology. In the top right-hand side of the screen shows that it changes professional roles now working in a hybrid fashion. For teachers in a face-to-face environment, working at home just isn't going to work on that basis. So for policymakers, we must look how the future seems, which might seem impossible at the moment or unspeakable. So if we can continue to weigh, as illustrated in the previous slide, we're not going to have a workforce to support our education systems. So therefore, we need to consider the new approaches and ways of thinking in education for our workforce to develop and thrive. And you can see there the other slides look at how the future of work is going to happen in terms of how and where and who. And then finally, as I'll just, because other people have already mentioned it, but the expanse of AI and technology and exactly how and where our children will be learning. So to finish on a couple of slides here, because I can see the 2-minute warning up, that this is how Staffordshire University, and this goes back to the, you know, what do I think about a professional educator and how is it that we put that through the lens? Because say what is a professional educator is easier kind of stated than actually what it is to describe it. And you'll see our 4 C's curriculum here. So we hold up high our curriculum and making sure that our teachers have huge subject knowledge. They've got to be reflective in terms of that continual reflection upon what they're doing and how and when and why and the tools which to do it, using research confidently to inform their practice, and a community centered, and whether that community is in their own classroom, their schools, their region, or even on a global scale, and where and when to use the lens. And finally, and this came through some of the other slides, recognition of the challenges that are up ahead against education systems. For example, special educational needs, mental health, and also sustainability in the world of education. And each one of those in our degrees here at Staffordshire Universities have specialist pathways. So that's just a flavour of how it is that we approach here. Paul, I'll hand over in that note to yourself. Can't hear you, Paul. Can't hear you, Paul.
Hi, Jim. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Sorry, waiting for it to come up. So this some
I
of
hope
the
I've stopped
thank you
sharing
so
my
much.
screen. Sorry, Paul.
That's fine. So the first thing is I want to say thank you, Jim, for that perspective, which is a little bit challenging, to put it mildly. And I'm not, as you said at the beginning, I'm not sure whether to celebrate that we've got an opportunity or just really worry about the challenge that we're facing at the moment. What I would like to say is that I think all three of the presentations have shown us the requirement for some serious strategic thinking across all our governments and across Asian governments, across African governments. And in fact, we had a question about collaboration with Africa, but that also that what really matters is that collaboration and partnership are going to be critical at all levels within the system to actually effect a meaningful change. Because otherwise, all that happens is the reinforcing of disadvantage that we've seen accelerated by COVID, and that we're seeing accelerated by the lack of access to digital tools and technologies. So what I'm going to do, we've got 5 or 10 minutes. We always run a little bit over. I do apologize. There have been some questions that have come up, which I'd like to throw open to the team. And I mean, we have the first question, I think, that we've got that's come up is, given what we've discovered today, where should we start? Where should we start creating the change? Is it at government level, or is it at the school level, or is it in our communities? So that's the first question that we've had that's come in. If anyone would like to answer that?
Paul, probably I
Yeah.
will start with my comments on this very important
Yeah.
question. You know, I think that inclusion is a style of life. First of all, we need to change our mode of thinking. Yes, and there are a number of measures that should be taken to achieve sustainable and quality education for all.
Mm-hmm.
For sure, it will cover governmental aspects, legacy. It will make change in teacher preparation, teacher professional development. But I think that if we speak at the global level, we need to speak about how to change our attitude to this inclusive education and how to prepare ourselves to understand the needs of such persons, of such learners. So I think that we'll need to start from ourselves. Thank you.
Okay, that's interesting. We had a lovely comment, which is at home, has just come in on the question and answers. Would the change will start at home, which I think came in from Gina. Any other thoughts, colleagues, around that question about where are the levers going to be? Yeah, go on, Brajesh.
Yeah, I agree with Natalia, but I think what is important is the countries have to drive, and there needs to be a recognition of the basic problems. But I think the national level may not be sufficient. So what is the implementation model? So at the end of the day, it boils down to the practical, aspect of implementation. Now, as I noted earlier, because school education is a devolved subject in most of the countries, that municipalities, particularly, I say municipality, that doesn't mean I'm ignoring rural areas, but you have to start somewhere where there are resources, where there is resolve to make changes. So identifying, dynamic mayors, for example, in cities, and benchmarking, agreeing about some of the quick wins, I think can build confidence. And then you layer it up, there are so many important aspects. So gradually building confidence and then doing it, so that will also unpack the roles and responsibilities of others as progress starts happening, because it's a joint effort, and I think you can see good results probably in about a year if that kind of consensus emerges.
So that's really an interesting comment in terms of, we had one question here about ensuring the expansion, how we can ensure, which is a different question to kind of policy make, how we can ensure the expansion of the right to education. And I think you talked about the rights and responsibilities being unpacked. Is that to do with, if you like, local political systems or local management systems?
Well, what I mean is expansion, has to also include technology, because if we just project the sort of requirements by 2030, we all know it's not possible to do that. So it is critical to bring a technology element in a way that helps to scale both equity and learning. And as I said earlier, learning, the quick results come because if a system is at a very low level, let's say, it is easier to ramp up initially. So that is where I think technology helps. And if there is inadequate, let's say, investment, then and these are the areas that you need to do. The reason I also emphasize technology is children, are shy to express themselves initially, and they need to make mistakes, and technology allows to do that, to make mistakes, learn, by themselves, and then build confidence. But you need teachers and some supporters to support that kind of learning, and then it's through that mechanism you multiply that, over time. Right now, you can't just expect miracles from a school which is constrained. Teachers are overloaded, so there are so many problems.
Okay, so
Paul, can I just jump in?
Yes, please, Jim. Yeah.
It was only just on Brajes's point, which I totally agree with, and this is a very simple kind of statement, and everyone's heard this before, but we know, whether it's on a global scale or local scale, where we need high quality education the most is where it's the most difficult to supply high quality education, whether it's because of the lack of infrastructure or teachers or investment. Now, the technology that we're seeing in what we've got in front of us today, for the first time, is a lever which we've never had to this extent before to solve that problem. And I think groups like this and policymakers, it's how is it that we're going to get to grips with that and use it most effectively.
So that answers one of the other questions, or I think is the beginning of the answer to the other question about what is the main goal of inclusive education. Because what I think, Jim, you're saying in there is that this is about using it as a lever to close that gap. Yeah, or to create a bridge almost to those places and those people who, because of infrastructure and wealth and so on and so forth, have just not had access, have not had fair crack. Yeah. Okay. So that therefore means that sorry, Natalia, go ahead.
Microphone. Sorry, my microphone.
So
I just want to start. Yes, I just need to start this answer with more broad understanding. I think that the main goal of inclusion or inclusive education is more the same as the goal of inclusive education, because actually, as today our experts have already showed, ICT has a great power on education and on inclusive education. I just want to say that I just a few days ago, I came from the Digital Learning Week from UNESCO Paris, and this was a great forum, mostly focused on artificial intelligence. And I need to say that there is a big window for implementation of AI in inclusive education. So now we speak not only about just regular PC, personal computer or mobile applications. Now we speak not only about assistive technologies, now we speak about artificial intelligence for people with disabilities. And we need to understand both the potential of this technology and the risk of this technology. There are a lot of questions around this topic, but just to say that the goal of inclusive education is to promote accessible and quality education for all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got time for just one question about the strategy. That we have had a number of questions which are about strategies and approaches in inclusive education in schools. I just want to pitch out there that there are 2 further webinars in this series. The first of which will look at how we can work as school institutions, whatever a school is going to be, around inclusion and technology. So we'll be looking at some of those issues later on in the year, and an invite will go out to everybody who's attended today. And then there will be a 3rd webinar in the new year, which will be looking actually at the classroom itself and how technology can support children actually on the floor and also in their own homes. So the number of questions about educative and pedagogical practice, we'll be addressing those at school level and then in the classroom as we go through this series. So those questions have been noted and we'll bring them forward. So we've got one strategy question, which is if teachers are underpaid and undervalued in the West, how can the East make this an attractive career path when student numbers are higher and wages even lower?
Did you mean to kick off?
Yeah, it depends what it is by kick off, but yes.
If I knew the answer, we'd have it all solved by lunch.
Okay.
I think the first one is there's something about the pay is only one part of the lens. I would suggest. So in the West now, I'm going to say this, and I know I would be argued by others, but I wouldn't say, certainly in the UK, it's the worst salaried point of view. And in fact, research shows that, but when teachers leave, and they are leaving a lot, they often go to lower paid jobs. So I would say it's probably a relative, it depends where you live in the UK, it's a salary which in comparison isn't as bad as sometimes we might think to others. I know if you compare it to a kind of a blue chip kind of company, it's not going to be at that level. But as I said, but pay does not seem to be the biggest reason why teachers are leaving or why they're entering. I think what we're seeing though across the globe is a recognition and I suppose a respect and also the esteem of what and how teachers are seen, and the education workforce does seem to be a factor. So in the countries which are maintain teachers and keep them is where they are seen as part of their society and quite high within that society. So that's my, because I appreciate time. So I'll leave it there in case our kind of our speakers want to say, but that's my start attempt.
Let me add to that. I think there should also be options to hiring teachers. For example, the concept of permanent teachers may not work when a system is improving significantly. What I mean by that is there can be a convergence with government's priority to also expand higher education. And some of the, let's say graduates from technical line, science, technology, they can become temporary teachers, like, that's why I mentioned about teach for all kind of concept, and then provide them scholarship for further education. That can, serve both the interest, long-term interest of graduates, but also short-term need to expand in science, technology, other areas. Similarly, I think it is also important to look at partnering with some other, private sector to introduce skills, because that is also becoming very important in particularly higher school level. So I think tweaking a little bit here and there can actually lead to win-win for everyone.
Thank you, Brajesh. Natalia, any thoughts?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, colleagues. I do agree with you. I also share this understanding that the salary should be more attractive, and it doesn't matter from which region the teacher is. But anyway, I think that this is a more global problem, more global concern, because in general, teachers don't have enough funding to implement their professional activities, and this is also important for teachers of inclusive education, since they need to have more skills, more competencies to work with children, to work with their students. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got something in there which is about thinking differently and creatively, thinking about social value. I think that's a point that Jim's making, but also thinking about the resourcing. And that comes up back to the national level and supranational level strategy, which I think Brajesh referred to really clearly in his strides. I'm very conscious of time and that we probably need to stop there. I want to thank Natalia, Brajesh, and Jim for what have been actually really amazing presentations. Actually, some of the most powerful stuff I think I've seen in a long time. I really got huge value out of it. I will make sure that this recording is made available along with the slides to everybody who's taken part. And we will be sending out, as I said, invites to the next 2 webinars, which will be, again, jointly presented by UNESCO IITE and our partners at Inquirer.net in the Philippines. Thank you so much for coming and joining us on this webinar, and we hope to see you soon.